in 1980 they started a distribution company to distribute software, and they were playing around with a lot of not good players, you know, the early CP/M software guys, and they ran into a guy named Wayne Ratliff, and he had a product called Vulcan, and that was the original D-Base product. And Wayne came from Jet Propulsion Laboratories, and he had a CDC 6400 which was one of the early 64-bit mainframes, and he had to write a database. Viking was a space probe that went out forever, and he had to have this data stream coming back, continuously, and I think it ran about 20 years out there. And so he wrote D-Base, what became D-Base, for the CDC 6400. And Wayne is a geek, a techie guy, and he had a CP/M machine, an Apple machine, and so he rewrote it for the CP/M. So it was actually became part of JPL. This is kind of significant because later years, the court took Ashton Tate's copyright away from D-Base because they said it belonged to Jet Propulsion Laboratories. And it never belonged to Ashton Tate, and there was hundreds of $millions worth of revenue taken for something that belonged to somebody else. So another whole story. But so anyway, Hal Lashley and George Tate got together, and Lashley was George Tate's accountant, and Hal Lashley had an accounting practice, a very good one. He's well known in Los Angeles, a small accounting company. And George got with Wayne and bought the distribution rights to Vulcan, and then hired a PR company, a guy named Paulk, to launch D-Base. And so George was a very good sales guy, and he's from North Carolina, kind of like a lot of guys around here. And so he knew that if they called it D-Base 1, nobody would buy it because they wanted to wait for D-Base 2, the second generation. So he named it D-Base 2, and that's where that name came from. And then Lashley didn't want to have his name as Lashley Tate because George Tate's name was on it. So the same Paul, this PR company, came up with the name Ashton because it sounded good. Lashley, it's 2 syllables. Lashley Tate, Ashton Tate. So George, whenever people wanted to know who Ashton was, George went out and bought a parrot, a big blue and yellow macaw, and that became Ashton. So that bird was in our cafeteria in the building. Ashton was at Ashton Tate. And so they started and did really well with the company, and then started having all kinds of problems. And I won't get into a lot of details, but there was a lot of drugs in Ashton Tate. It's Southern California, the Beach Life, and they reached $38 million, and they were starting to go down from that $38 million. And they had a lot of competitors. R-Base from Seattle was there. ANSA came up. So they started having trouble. And one of the board members came to me. His name's Ron Posner. He's a very successful guy in the IT business. He started a company called Scientific Data Systems, a computer mainframe, and sold to Xerox for about $500 million profit to him. And that became XDS, was a mainframe long before you guys were around. And anyway, Posner came to me and said, I need to have you come to work at Ashton Tate. I was working at Lotus, and they put together a package, and I moved over to Ashton Tate, and I brought 38 guys from Boston that we were known as the boys from Boston and Ashton Tate to come with me to run this company. And we started seeing all the problems that they had people-wise and the problems they had in the marketplace, because the other guy's product was better. D-Base 3 hadn't been launched yet. So we took a different kind of strategy. We had 6 distributors, and everybody needed Ashton Tate, Lotus, and Microsoft to survive as a distributor. So we had absolute control of the distributors. And so we raised the minimum order to get the maximum discount to 10,000 copies of D-Base at a time. So everybody had to buy 10,000 copies. And then we made them report the database sales, their other databases, like RBase and ANSA and Paradox and the other databases that were, so this is a whole different kind of strategy than we had from Lotus. And then that 10,000 quota per month to maintain your distributorship, we multiplied times 3 the amount of other databases that they sold. And so we made it very painful to keep selling other people's products. And the U.S. government later called it predatory practices, so we had to quit doing it. But by the time that we were stopped by the feds, we put the other people out of business virtually. We dominated the market. We had DBase 3, we launched that. And so we went from 38 million, and 2 years later we were 269 million in revenue and about 50 million in profit. So we had defeated all of our competition by controlling the channel and launching DBase 3. So there's other ways where you can get shut out of, you can have a good business and have the business taken away from you. So that was kind of a different kind of strategy rather than getting the big 8 like we did with Lotus. We control the channel. And so we did that, and we grew the company up to be a good sized company and successful. And unfortunately, George Tate died of a drug overdose while I was in Paris launching into the European market. So that kind of gives you an idea of the depth of the drug thing that we have going at Ashland Tate. I looked at Wikipedia today just to refresh my memory of all the players, and they said he died of a heart attack at age 40, but he actually died of a cocaine overdose in his office. Wow. And that was kind of a shock for everybody involved in that. But we continued on with the company, and we made it a good, successful company. And I decided to do my first retirement, so I retired and moved to Lake Tahoe, and that lasted about 6 months. And there were some venture guys called me. Now you have to remember, I'm an airplane guy, right? So some venture guys called me, and we just finished building a house up at the lake that was, quote, they're going to be the house for the rest of our lives, kind of thing. And these guys called me and said, we'd like to talk to you about this company in Scottsdale, Arizona, and would you be interested in maybe getting involved in it? I said, well, I just finished this house at Lake Tahoe, and I don't think I can move to Scottsdale. So I don't think my wife, Maureen, would have appreciated that very much. And they said, well, we've got a Learjet. We'll pick you up tomorrow and fly you down to Scottsdale. And so naturally, I said, okay. so I go down there, and the name of the company was Mygent Software. I'm finished, thank you. The name of the company was Mygent Software Company, and they were unsuccessful and had a lot of venture money put into the company. And these guys were trying to figure out how to get their money back. And they said, well, you do it. I said, well, you'd have to move it to Lake Tahoe. And they said, okay, we'll move it to Lake Tahoe. And they had about 60 people, and about 30 people came up to Lake Tahoe. And we assured them that it wasn't that much snow. And so the first year we had the record snow in 1986 of 15 feet of snow and 1 snowfall at Lake Tahoe. It's because you survived the 1986 Lake Tahoe. So what we did with that company, their product was a database that was a natural language database, and it was horrible. It was virtually unsaleable, because it was just a really bad